I read 156 books last year. I made it just in the nick of time. That was my exact goal. It was 3 books a week, and I decided to tier rank the top 24 because I have to tell you, when you read 156 books, a lot of them end up being really good. Some of them are not, but a lot of them do end up being really, really good. It was already really difficult to curate down to just 24 titles, and I will do my best to tell you which of these are the best of the best. We're gonna go in order so that you can follow the highlights of my 2024 reading journey. We're gonna start in January, where I read Octavia Butler's Bloodchild and Other Stories. As you may know, I love Octavia Butler. The only work of hers that I still haven't read is the Patternist series, and it is on she's being so silly. The Patternist series is on my bedside table. Don't worry, it will get read probably this year. I was so happy to read Bloodchild. I got it from the library, and I really want to find my own copy. But whenever I see the paperback, it's like a much uglier cover than this one, and I absolutely love this one. I think it's beautiful. And this is a solid A tier for me. I already kind of know that this came out as a banger, was an immediate 5 stars. The titular story is already excellent. Octavia Butler refers to it as her male pregnancy story, and she's like, every science fiction writer needs one. It's weird. If you don't like leeches, maybe don't read it, because it's a literal blood child. But 2 subsequent stories really marked me. The one around speech and the loss of speech and what a society that loses ways of communicating looks like, as well as the one around a genetic propensity for extreme violence and extreme self-destruction. Both of those were fascinating, masterful. If you like speculative fiction, you have to read this collection. And then there are 2 fantastic essays about being a writer, being a Black female writer, and what that means in the science fiction genre. If you haven't heard of Octavia Butler, this is a low commitment, great place to start. I really liked it. Solid A tier. Fantastic. The next book that I read, also in January, I listened to, and that's Heather O'Neill's When We Lost Our Heads. This is the story of 2 girls who grew up in the rich part of Montreal during the Industrial Revolution, and they form this like bizarre friendship turned rivalry that culminates when they are children in the death of the housekeeper. The 2 little girls decide to have a pistol duel, and the housekeeper sees them and goes, absolutely not, and runs as they shoot. And the rich girl gets to keep her life, while the less rich girl is sent to, for lack of better words, a home for wayward girls. And the story then expands and folds in on itself in really interesting ways. I love stories that have strong self and shadow self components. And this one, we have these 2 girls who are their own shadow selves, and then they acquire an additional self and shadow self. So we end up following 4 different girls. And as they grow into women, it's absolutely fantastic. If you're into historical fiction, if you're into coming of age novels, if you're into the struggles that women faced in the mid to late 18th century, 19th century, I know how time works. 1800s is what I was trying to say. I really recommend this, and the writing is stellar. I listened to this on audio, and I have to say the audiobook was fantastic. All that said, it didn't change my life. It's not getting into S tier. And it was pretty good, but I didn't end up giving it 5 stars. I think I gave it like a 4.5, 4.75. So I'm gonna pop it in the B tier, I think. I feel pretty good about that for now. We'll see what happens next. January 2024, I was on the treadmill a lot because I discovered that listening to audiobooks while running is actually really fun. I need to get back to doing that. I thought about doing that today, but I've decided to film this video instead. That said, listening to Murakami is what I talk about when I talk about running on the treadmill was a surreal experience and very, very motivating. I'm a pretty big fan of Haruki Murakami's, but I think this was the first of his nonfiction that I've read, and I found it very inspiring. Of course, it's about running, but it's also about life. It's also about figuring out what to do once you're in your 30s. Murakami really didn't start writing until he was 35. And figuring out what your body can do as you age. He also didn't start running until later. I just recently turned 31, and I'm kind of in that space of figuring out what am I doing and what can my body do? What am I actually capable of? This book has really stuck with me. I've been meaning to buy myself a copy next time I find it, but we'll see how that goes. I found it really influential, so I'm going to pop it in the A tier. It's not quite going in the S tier because it didn't quite earn a 5 stars, and I think it earned like a 4.75. These are all essentially 5-star books, just some of them are like hard 5 stars, some of them are like soft 5 stars. You know what I mean? This is a soft 5 star. And there are a few on this list that are hard 5 stars, and I can't wait to get to them. But that was January. That was a great reading month already. I read a bunch more books, but these were the highlights that stood out for me. And then in February, I was on vacation. And while on vacation, I had my e-reader with me, and I was reading The Girl with All the Gifts. And The Girl with All the Gifts was surprisingly excellent. This was around the same time that The Last of Us TV show had come out, and it was also around the same time that I was reading a lot about fungi, like Merlin Sheldrake's book and stuff like that. So having a zombie fungal apocalypse going on was really fantastic, and experiencing that story from the point of view of our main character, a titular girl with all the gifts, who is both human and zombie, something in between, and she wants to know what is happening to her. So we start off with these children who are kind of semi-immune to the zombie, I think it's cordyceps in the book actually, so to the zombie fungal parasite situation. They're wheeled into a classroom completely strapped down because all the like human workers there are terrified that they're gonna bite their heads off. But they're still kids, and they just like hang out in this classroom and have actual like conversations. But really, they're in an institution to eventually be killed and dissected and studied in order to figure out how to stop the plague. I loved it. It was just like, it was good fun. It was just really, really good fun. When I think about the book, I think about how much I enjoyed the reading process. It was a nice chonker, and it kept me turning pages. So it was just good. I'm gonna pop it, along with When We Lost Our Heads, into the B tier. I think it really deserves that. It was just a solid story. I do recommend it. The 5th book from 2024 that I wanted to highlight to you was the Doomsday book. I was really nervous about picking this one up because I saw some reviews talking about the pacing of this being very slow and people not really being able to finish it. And this book is about time travelers from future Oxford, where the history department has a time machine, so history graduate students can go back in time. And here we have one history graduate student, Kevrin, who goes back to the early 1300s in essentially medieval England. And she goes to this village where suddenly a mysterious illness appears. And in the future that she has left behind, another mysterious illness appears. And reading this post-pandemic was such a bizarre experience, because you saw how the plague, whether literal or non-literal, I'll leave that up to you for when you read the book, but you saw how the plague spreading in medieval times and in modern times, the sort of kind of lockdown-ish things that people tried to do. There was a lot of good themes of sacrifice and resilience and human connection. But my favorite part of this, I listened to it on audio, was the amount of dry British humor. And I mean dry British humor. Like, if you enjoy British humor, pick this up immediately. If you are very annoyed by it, I would actually step away from this. I personally love it. I grew up watching like all the British comedy panel shows, and especially QI, and this just like tickled the same kind of nerves. There's a lot of characters that exist solely for comedic effect, and this book is long. I listened to it on audio, and I think it was over 25 hours. But I never thought I would be someone interested in what was happening in the 1300s. I was absorbed. I loved the character of the village priest. I loved the characters of the little girls who our time traveler gets to meet. I loved the academic shenanigans that were occurring in the near future in Oxford, the people left behind. I just found it so evocative and complete, and like genuinely, I think this is one of my favorite books that I read in the past year. Like, I'm gonna pop it behind Bloodchild and in front of what I talk about when I talk about running. I'm not feeling super confident about putting it behind Bloodchild. It's kind of the same in my head, but let's leave it there for just now. I really recommend this if you're into historical fiction and time travel science fiction. Like, you have to pick this up. It's actually fantastic. It was written in the 90s. I don't even know if it's been republished, but get your hands on it. It is so good. I'm a big fan of short story anthologies, and I'm a big fan of folk horror. So when I saw Never Whistle at Night, I was so excited about it because it's an anthology of Indigenous dark fiction. So basically, Indigenous stories from Turtle Island, meaning North America, Canada, and the US. Indigenous stories from Turtle Island are transformed by modern day horror fiction writers. I believe Stephen Graham Jones is the person who assembled the anthology, and this book includes short stories from a few other Indigenous authors that I've read and many more that I have yet to read. And they tackle everything from kind of old Indigenous lore to modern day intergenerational trauma and living crises and all these kinds of things. It was a really cool kind of cornucopia. There were some stories that, like, the imagery just lives in the back of my brain, that when I see that cover I get a little bit of spine tingle. It's fantastic. That said, there were some short stories that didn't fully resonate with me. That's the problem with anthologies, is like every now and at least like a third of it kind of feels a little bit like filler because they're meant to appeal to a broad range of audiences. So I will be a little bit mean and pop it in the C tier because it was solid, it was good, but there were parts that just didn't work for me as much as I would have wanted them to work for me. I nearly DNF'd this like 4 times. The Terror is apparently about 1,000 pages long. It felt longer than that when I was reading it on my Kobo. It took me weeks, and I did not care for the first 40% of the book. I genuinely did not care. And then it became weird. So this is the story of it's a fictionalized version of an expedition that was looking to discover the Northwest Passage, meaning to discover a way to get from Europe to Asia going over northern Canada. The ship that they called the Terror, which is a terrible name. Terrible name for a vessel. Like, do you really want to do that to your crew? Is that good for morale? Really? They called this ship the Terror, and they got stuck in ice. And you'll notice that this will be a theme for a lot of the books that I ended up reading because I think The Terror marked me this much. This book really explored what hunger and desperation and being stranded in vast lands actually feels like. I've never felt the sort of sense of, oh wow, there's nothing there. There's no resources. There's nothing. That sense for the, like, I felt it the most, I think, ever while reading The Terror. Just the sense of the expansiveness of ice in all directions, that you could walk for days, you could walk for months, and there's just nothing. The environment is hostile. No one's coming to save you. No one knows where you are. It's game over. It's this like existential terror of almost floating in space, but you're on Earth stuck in ice. And then of course there are some really fun tie-ins into the historical truth. Many of the characters in The Terror are based off of real historical figures. And the problem is that this actually happened, that this boat was stranded. And some parts of it have been found and some parts of notebooks have been found. But for the large part, we don't really know the details of what happened. So there's a reimagining of the different ways in which folks went insane, the different resourceful ways in which folks found food or became food, as the case may be. And it just, I look at this cover now and I'm like, wow, what a book. What a book. It unleashed something in my brain that after this book, I started to seek out these like stories of survival. I mean, I'm already someone who reads a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction and stories of survival, but you will continue to sense a theme. So where will I put The Terror? I think I'm gonna put it in B tier, but just in front of these guys. I'm debating with the order here. I think the writing was better in When We Lost Our Heads, but I think I enjoyed the journey of Girl with All the Gifts more. So since this is a tier ranking reflecting my own enjoyment, I will do this order. We'll see if I stay committed to the order or not. Already just choosing between like these 7 is hard, and I'm trying to rank the top 24. And already making the selection of what would make the top 24 was a challenge. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, that was in April. And then in April, I also read Annie Bot. Annie Bot is told from the perspective of what I can only describe as a sentient AI sex doll. So she exists only to be this rich guy's girlfriend, and he can do basically anything he wants to her, and he can alter what she wants and change her settings. And if he wants to stick her in a closet for a week because he's angry at her, he can do that. I found it a really interesting exploration not only of human AI dynamics, which is obviously very prescient in our current time, but it was also a really interesting exploration of the role of women in the world and abusive relationship dynamics and what it means to have agency over self and what it means to have certain roles in society. I found it really engaging on audio. It's a little bit predictable, like, the AI gains a sense of independence and then she wants to escape, and that becomes kind of like an issue because she's produced by a company and the guy is technically paying the company to have access to her. So it becomes this whole situation. And while it's a little bit predictable, I still really enjoyed it and I would recommend it, especially on audio. It was really fun on audio. So I'm going to pop it right here. I think we're going to hit our first S tier book. I have seen I Who Have Never Known Men going around on social media. I'm so glad this is getting a revival. And I was going to read it in English, and then I remembered, non, moi je parle français. So I have to tell you, Moi qui n'ai pas connu les hommes, in French, stellar. Absolutely stellar. So this is the story of 39 women and one slightly younger girl, so 40 women really, who are in a prison where they have bars on all four sides and male guards walk around them, surveying them day and night. It's a constantly surveilled thing. And they don't know how long they've been there. They don't know why they're there. They get foods and their basic needs are met. The guards do not communicate with them. They don't remember anything from before they had this prison. And the main character doesn't remember anything at all. So sorry, all the older women, they do remember sort of their past lives, but they have no idea how they went from their past lives to waking up in this prison, while our youngest character, she doesn't remember her past life. She never remembers actually interacting with human beings who are not these other 39 women. Like I said, the guards do not interact with them. And then one day, for some reason, some kind of alarm goes off, their door opens, but the guards also leave and disappear. And the women don't know what to do. They slowly make their way out of this compound prison situation and try to find out what is happening in the world around them. They find out that they've been in an underground bunker, and they emerge above ground into uninhabited land where they see no one. And they try to figure out, well, are we going to survive? What's the point of survival? They build this little nomadic community. They try to help each other get food, treat each other's illnesses. Slowly they start dying of both preventable and non-preventable diseases, of old age. They find other underground bunkers resembling theirs. They find an old school bus that seemed to have been used for bringing guards from one spot to another, and they find one book in there, but also no answers. And our youngest member, our youngest narrator, who I believe has no name, I might be wrong, but I believe she has no name. She just has to exist in this world that actually just has no future and has no answers. And she tries to understand what sort of world came before. She asks the women, tries to get details of what the world was like before it was like this. And they're very reticent to tell her. And while it sounds like I spoiled the entire novel, I absolutely didn't. The writing and the exploration of themes and just the eeriness of the setting alone, you could know the plot and still absolutely enjoy this one. It was amazing. There was a reason that it's making the rounds on various book social medias right now. If you can read it in French, read it in French, but if not, I Who Have Never Known Men. It is so, so good. And yeah, it's it lives in my brain. It has its own little room, little underground bunker, and it sits there very happily. I remember a night in May where I couldn't sleep, and I had started reading Woman Eating. So I left the bedroom, went to sit down on my couch, which is kind of behind the piano over here, and I read the entirety of the book in one sitting. This is about a young vampire. Well, she's a half vampire. Her mother is/was a vampire and is now dying of dementia, which is kind of terrible because she won't ever actually die given she's immortal, but she's succumbing to various serious dementia. And meanwhile, our main character, our lead vampire, she's just trying to make it in art school. She's just trying to make it on her own. And she's also trying to not be a vampire. She's trying to only live off of well-sourced, ethical animal blood, not eat any humans, and just blend into the human world, embrace her humanity, and deny her vampire ways. The book is lyrical and metaphorical and talks about identity and culture and cultural clashes. There's some horror, some existentialism. It's extremely personal, and I just love what it did with the vampire mythos. I think it did it excellently, and this book just made me like extremely sad. It was such a good experience. I remember finishing it at 4 a.m. and just kind of sitting there like, yeah. It's the only book by the author, and I really hope she puts out some other work because the writing in this was so fantastic. And the depiction of like a difficult adult child and mother relationship, adult daughter and mother relationship specifically, was incredible. I highly recommend this to you. It's going in my A tier. I think it's gonna go right after Doomsday book. Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about that. Definitely in front of the Murakami. I feel pretty good about that. So that was great. That was one night in May. And then another time in May, I was reading the trilogy. The Copenhagen trilogy, that's what it's colloquially known as. Childhood, Youth, and Dependency. I've never read this author before, and I had been recommended this trilogy by a friend a couple of years back, and I was like, I don't know how much I'll care about it, how much I'll like it. It was fantastic, I have to say. Childhood and Youth are both relatively short. Actually, all 3 sections are short, and they kind of have what they say on the tin. It's the story of going from a relatively idyllic childhood in the interwar period in Europe, so like early 20th century, between World War I and World War II, when the politics are shifting, and what it's like to grow up as a young woman in those days. Women are getting more rights, but there's also courtship, and they also have to work for certain things, and there's money troubles. And eventually she falls into some terrible relationships and into some very, very serious opioid dependence. And that's what the last chapter, that's what the last novella is about. Novella, section, whatever we want to call it. What a great like Audition memoir, I have to say. The prose is absolutely beautiful. I knew nothing about the author, and yet I still really, really enjoyed this memoir. If you have any interest in how a life can go from childhood all the way to adult dependency, especially over 100 years ago and in ways that are still relevant today, pick this up. It's great. And I think I'm gonna pop it in B tier. I don't know how it compares to the other two. I feel like I should just keep them in order that I actually read them because it's so difficult to compare books between one another. I can't wait to read more of her stuff though. She's written a few novels, and those are on my TBR to be read very soon. Very soon. Next was Hotline. So I want to say it's Overdrive that organizes this. There's a little bit of a book club situation where I think Overdrive makes unlimited copies of the ebook and audiobook available in participating libraries on Libby. And one of the books from last year was Hotline. And this is a Canadian novel set in Montreal, which is where I am, set in Montreal, and it follows a Lebanese immigrant mother. She's a single mother raising a 7-year-old son, and she tries to navigate the horrors of being newly immigrant, financially unstable, and in a culture she doesn't know, not knowing if her husband is alive or not because she immigrated here as a refugee with her child. And she's navigating all of this and really struggling. And the reason it's called Hotline is that she works at a hotline for dietary, like a diet company, basically. So the company prepares these really low calorie meals. And so people call in who have issues with their weight. And the company's like, here's a 200-calorie breakfast and a 400-calorie lunch. So basically starvation meals. And she acts as a kind of counselor, so she has clients who get that food. Like, they order that food and that's their diet, and then they call her when they're like, I actually really want to eat a bag of chips. I'm super hungry. And it's like, of course you are. You're eating less than half of your needed calories a day. And she tries to counsel them, but also she like doesn't have the cultural background necessarily. There's beautiful scenes of her integrating in other immigrant communities and trying to figure out how to navigate her new life and like what she can bring to other communities. I cried. I gotta say, I kind of cried listening to the end of this. It's extremely poignant and a really just beautiful, beautiful story, and a really sad story. If anything I said resonated with you, please pick this up. Like, yeah, this was good. It's gonna go on the C tier simply because I think I ended up giving it like 4.5 stars because it didn't change my life. But when I look at this cover now, my heartstrings are pulled at. Even though I don't love the design of the cover, I have to say I don't think it conveys the seriousness and intensity of the story. But I'm so glad that this is one of the big library reads that Overdrive, one of the big library reads, so the Overdrive book club thingy. I'm really glad that they chose this one because I don't think I would have picked it up on it otherwise. It feels weird to tell you that this book was good. Like, you know, these are my top 24 books of 2024. Every single book on here is going to be good. Consider all of these recommendations because they are. Here are 24 recommendations of very sort of different books. Sort of. I don't know if they're different from one another. There will be emerging themes as we continue throughout the video. All right, we're nearly halfway there. Let's keep going. June happened, and I had recently watched Yellow Jackets, the TV show, and I think Yellow Jackets bore itself into my brain in a way that I was then like, I need to find books that are relevant to Yellow Jackets. And one of them was The Terror that I'd previously mentioned, this guy here. One of them was I Who Have Never Known Men. And then I saw The Natural Way of Things, and The Natural Way of Things is like a companion novel to I Who Have Never Known Men. Charlotte Wood is an Australian author who's put out some other books. I haven't read any of them yet, but after this one, I really want to. The Natural Way of Things was as if you took holes in I Who Have Never Known Men and put them in a blender. These women are living... So they're essentially wayward girls who are sent to a camp in an Australian desert because they are involved in some sort of romantic scandal, such as being involved with a major politician, and best thing to do for them is to just disappear for a little while. They need to be put aside. And there's not a lot of people actually kind of running this camp of teenage girls. There's only maybe 3 or 4 adults, actual adults there, and they try to, you know, rule with authority, knock the girls down a peg. Chaos ensues, and it's very hot. It's the Australian desert, and the compound seems forgotten about by the outside world. Strange things happen. Strange things of survival happen. Having both watched Yellow Jackets and read I Who Have Never Known Men, and also having a big fondness for Holes, both the movie and the book, that made this a 5-star read for me. The prose was great. It was really fun. I can't wait to read more of Charlotte Wood. If you have Charlotte Wood recommendations, please drop them down because I am interested. We've reached the point in the video where my life was briefly changed. Not in a good way. So I have been trying to read the person who I and many other call the other Murakami. Okay, not Haruki Murakami, but, and I don't have the phonemes to say this properly, Ryu Murakami. So, I'd read In the Miso Soup, I think in 2023, and then I read Audition in 2024. And Audition is the story of a man who is widowed, and he has a teenage son. And his teenage son, after a couple of years, goes like, hey dad, you should probably marry again. You seem really lonely. And he goes, you know what? I should. But how do I meet a great woman? And he has a buddy who's in the film industry who goes, well, why don't we hold auditions for a fake movie and have a character who is cast type as the type of woman you would like to have as a wife, and just get a bunch of people to audition and see who you like. So they do that. They have a little casting call for a bunch of women who don't know that they're actually interviewing to be this guy's wife. And one of them really stands out. One of them really, really stands out. There's a movie version of this, and if you're at all squeamish, if you don't like horror, avoid this. Avoid the movie. Like, this is... Oh, I think this book is cursed. Genuinely, I think this book is cursed. And the reason I say that is that I remember finishing reading this book, and I will put a spoiler here and just like skip ahead to the timestamp I put here so that you miss the spoiler. It's relatively minor, but it could ruin your enjoyment of the book, so just skip ahead. Okay, so a foot gets severed in this book. Actually, foot severing is kind of like a big theme in the book. Like, people lose limbs, but especially feet. Limbs and various appendages, but especially feet. And the day after I finished this book, I went bouldering. And in the 2 years that I'd been climbing, this was my first real big injury. I busted my ankle. And when I say I busted it, I mean this was July. It is now January. My ankle still doesn't have full mobility, and I did all the physio. It was a bad sprain. And all I could think was, I think Audition cursed me. I fell on the silliest climb too. I fell maybe 2 feet off the ground. My foot hadn't had time to properly land. So instead of landing like flat, the way a foot should, it landed like this. And my entire ankle and multiple ligaments had some partial tears, and my foot turned purple. And all I could think is, it's Audition's fault. So yeah, I don't know if I'll ever read this book again because I think it's cursed. I did watch the movie after reading the book, and the movie does a very, very good job of getting in, bringing about the atmosphere of horror. And there's some really, really trippy scenes in the movie. But again, if you're at all squeamish, if me mentioning foot stuff already was just too much, don't watch it. Alright, everyone who wanted to avoid a spoiler has now returned. We are here. We've made it. So yeah, I blame Audition for my accident in July, specifically, and because of that, it's going quite low in the B tier. But it's very memorable, and I can't read... Yeah. That said, it's quite memorable, and I can't wait to read more of the other Murakami. If you have recommendations, please let me know. I have one of the books in French, and I can't remember the title off the top of my head. But I know there are a few, and like I said, the only ones I've read are Audition and The Miso Soup. So if you have recommendations, please. I need, I'm ready to suffer. If you watched my birthday haul video, you know how much I loved Monstrillo. I love Monstrillo so much. This is a story of grief, a story of transformation. It's a love letter to Frankenstein, a kind of Frankenstein retelling that doesn't dress itself up as a Frankenstein retelling, is the best way I can put it. It's extremely emotional. It's a book in 4 parts, each part written from the point of view of a different character. First, the mother, grieving the loss of her child, and I'm gonna definitely get them wrong, but at one point it's the chapter of the aunt. At another point, it's the chapter of the father's perspective. And finally, it's the chapter of the changeling, the replacement child, little Monstrillo. Because who is Monstrillo? Monstrillo was grown from a lobe of the lung of the child who died. The child Santiago dies in the first page of the book, and his mother, grief-stricken, amputates a little bit of this child's only lung. That's actually why he dies, is from respiratory failure, because he only has one lung. And she amputates a portion of this lung, covered in blood herself. Like, it's very, like, a lot is happening. She's covered in blood herself, and then she just puts it in bone broth, and she's like, I'm gonna feed this lung. And at one point, this thing starts to grow, and it starts to grow fur, and it grows this little, like, solo appendage, and at one point it escapes its bone broth. It even grows a mouth and starts biting people. It is Monstrillo. It is the monster. But as it continues to grow, it starts to resemble Santiago, the dead child that it came from. Yeah, I don't want to spoil anything else. This is incredible. Absolutely incredible. And as I mentioned when I was talking about Audition, I was injured while I was reading this. I was freshly injured and couldn't walk very far. And I remember reading this on the beach because it was mid-July. It was a hot sun. I had my Kobo and I was lying on the beach. I couldn't move. And I was just looking at this book in like horror and fascination and feeling the grief and feeling the like South American surrealist writing. So unsettling. So it's so good. It's so good. This is obviously going to S tier. Like let's be real. I just bought a copy of this because it's so good. I've been really into memoirs lately, and I've also been really into nonfiction that explores women's health and especially ways in which women's chronic health issues are disregarded, played down, disbelieved, etc. The Tiger in the Cage was a wonderful merge of the two. This is a memoir in which the author struggles with very severe, and when I say very severe, I've never heard of a case like this, and I have shared a lot of various details with lots of friends, but I have never heard of a case of endometriosis that is this severe. And the author walks us through the psychological repercussions, the physical repercussions of the surgeries, the medications, the hormones, the lack thereof, and how much the illness stole from her in terms of personal life, in terms of friendships, professional development, self-esteem, self-image. It's an incredible memoir about what it's like to live in a body that gives you so much pain and that other people don't really know how to deal with. There's a lot of the sense of like, can you please do something else for me? And it's hard to tell whether people are unable to or simply unwilling, but either way, it's kind of a horror story. Lots of really short chapters and super emotionally honest. I recommend this if you're at all interested in invisible illness, invisible disability, these kinds of memoirs. It's not a very well-known book, and I think it really should be. It was really, 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 I know I say this a lot, but it was so good. All of these were so good, but this was so good. I think I'm gonna pop it in the C tier just because the C tier is starting to feel a little bit lonely. And I think in terms of like how much it changed my life, not that much, because none of it felt like super new for me, simply because these are the types of stories I've read before. But it felt familiar in a sad way. And I think it's a really great recommendation to give you if this is a topic that you would like to learn more about. I haven't done an escape room since before COVID, and I really enjoyed escape rooms. I'm very good at them. I get very competitive. I am the person who gives orders in an escape room. Do not do one with me. I am a little bit unhinged. The reason I bring that up is because Reprieve is set in a sort of escape room. It's a old manor that has 6 interconnected rooms. And it's a full contact escape room, meaning there are actors in there, the same way as there are actors in haunted houses, only these people touch you and do really scary and weird things. And Reprieve is like a dual timeline book. So we go through the 6 rooms, and in between there are court transcripts because something clearly terrible has happened, as well as the backstories of the people who participate in the escape room, be it as organizers or as actual participants on that one fateful night where we learn relatively quickly someone actually died. And the thing about this escape room is you don't just do it for fun. If you actually get through the 6 rooms, you win a lot of money. Like, it's very American, like, if you make it through, you get your $40,000 and don't have to, you know, cover your, like, your mother's medical bills are all covered now. And the title is called Reprieve because most people don't make it through the escape room. Most people shout the safe word, which is reprieve, by room 2, 3, maybe 4, because it is freaking terrifying. And the way the rooms are described is actually terrifying. I really, really enjoyed the horror aspect of this. I found it very compelling. And then I also enjoyed the backstories of the characters. The characters are quite different and they have very different motivations for why they're there. I don't want to spoil too much for you, but I will say that the characters are not always sympathetic. They're very gray, and there are a lot of kind of surprising motivations. And there are characters that you want to like them, but they also do some really like weird, silly, and inappropriate things. And you're like, oh, I don't know how I feel about them. And I think that's part of this destabilization of the book. I found the writing really compelling. I recommend this if you want a fast paced kind of thriller with some really artsy horror scenes in terms of what is actually happening in those 6 rooms. It was great. It wasn't life changing. It's gonna hang out on the bottom tier here, but it was really good. And honestly, I'm thinking of buying a copy because I just want to reread just those little like descriptions of the rooms because what? My favorite book on this list. It's always really hard to choose a best book of every year, but sometimes you just know. And when I finished My Favorite Thing is Monsters in one night, I knew. This is a graphic novel. I don't think I've ever been like, ah, yes, the graphic novel that I read this year is the best book I've ever read. This is the best book. This is the best book I read in 2024. Like, no holds barred. And I can't find a copy anywhere. Everywhere is back ordered. I don't know if they've been reissued. I don't know what's going on. Part 2 came out this year, but part 1 came out in 2017, I want to say. And part 2 was supposed to come out right after, but then there were some nightmares around publishing. This book has lore. This is the first book by the author. She's in her late 60s, kind of mysterious. She drew everything in ballpoint pen. Some of it feels very autobiographical, and we have, how do I put it, trigger warning everything. This follows a 10-year-old girl growing up in Chicago, and not in a very good part of Chicago. And her brother is involved in some various illegal activity. He's much older, and he doesn't always know how to protect her. Her mother's very ill. She does not have a lot of friends. She draws herself as a werewolf. She sees herself as very other. She's coming to terms with her initial romantic feelings towards other girls. She's trying to figure out what happened to her neighbor who was brutally murdered. And she really liked this neighbor. She finds this neighbor's diary, and you find out that this neighbor is a Holocaust survivor. But not only a Holocaust survivor is the best way I could put it. And I don't want to get deeper into the story of what the neighbor endured, mostly because I don't want my YouTube video taken down. This was my favorite book of last year, and I feel like I can recommend it to no one. Like, if any person asks me and I don't know anything about them, if they should read this book, I'm gonna be like, probably not. Like, probably not. I loved it because it's terrible. Terrible things happen. And we have a really precocious narrator who is very artistic, who is struggling with understanding the adult world and understanding herself in it. It's a coming-of-age novel of a character who also really loves monsters. She loves, like, her current, like, horror movies. She gets these horror magazines. She loves monsters. She loves drawing them, but then she's faced with real-life atrocity in the present and in the past. And reconciling all of that, it's like 10 different plot points are happening at all times in this book, and all of them are happening to this 10-year-old girl. And the book is the result of how she copes with them. It's stellar. I don't know what else to say. Like, this is S tier. It's going right here. It was so good. And I'm including the sequel because immediately when I put this down, I'm like, I need the sequel right now. And thankfully it was on my library's Hoopla, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to read it, and because they're impossible to find. I found them in French, but I don't want them in French. I want them in the original language, obviously. And when I do see their prices, one volume is $70. So to own both volumes would be like $150. And you know what? That's what I should have bought myself for my birthday. But I made some mistakes instead. In case you haven't seen my most recent haul video, I made some amusing choices, let's put it that way. Mostly because this is just hard to find, it's not currently available in stock, and also, like, it immediately rose to this level of mythos in my heart that I don't even know if I want to look at it again, because that evening that I read it feels magical now. Genuinely, it feels like a magical August evening. I remember it was like a Friday night. It was hot. I read well into the night. Impeccable. Impeccable. I recommend this if you like really messed up literature and really messed up coming of age books. If you are someone who wants to avoid heavy topics, run from this. Away. This is probably also not the channel for you, because I read a lot of heavy topics. We've already had our cannibalism and there will be more. But this one is among the heaviest books on this list. So take that as you will. So I read that in August, and then the other book that I picked up in August is Salman Rushdie's memoir, Knife. So Salman Rushdie is a long-term magical realism author. I've read a few of his books. I really enjoyed The Satanic Verses. I really enjoyed Midnight's Children. I found him a very compelling writer. And I remember when he was attacked on stage by a man with a knife. So if you don't know the kind of what's going on with Salman Rushdie, is he's had to live in protective custody for decades now due to some of his writing and the way that religious extremists have reacted to his writing, including things that they haven't actually read, but just from hearing about what their writing is about. And one of these people accosted Salman Rushdie during a speaking gig. He came on stage with a knife and stabbed him multiple times. He nearly died. He was in very critical condition, and he lost an eye. And I feel like I didn't realize there's a lot of limb loss and appendage loss on my list. I'm aware of that. But I really found his musings on the loss of an eye and what having a single eye and having half your vision go. There was this really incredible free association in the chapters. I listened to the book narrated by the author, which is a perfect way to experience this. Absolutely mesmerizing. And just, he takes us forward and backwards in time. He walks us through how he experienced the attack, how he experienced the recovery post-attack, how he thinks about symbolism of things like knives and symbolism of losing eyes and what do eyes mean. And he struggles with his own resilience. It's an incredible emotional book. It's one of the few books on the New York Times notable books of 2024 that I actually read, and yes, it's notable. It's very notable. It's a relatively short book. If you're at all interested in this, you have to read it. This is going to the S tier. This is August. I had 2 S tier books. I had 2 books that were just 6 stars, 10 stars, like this, off the charts, because they were so good. Obviously. Yeah, pick up Knife. Pick up Knife if you're at all interested. It's a short read. It's incredible. And if you like magical realism, read some Salman Rushdie, because what a catalog. I can't wait to read more of him, but I kind of just want to reread Knife 3 more times, because wow. I was so marked by the terror in March and sitting with that book that I ended up looking for other nonfiction retellings of similar expeditions that got stranded, possibly had to resort to cannibalism. Again, it was kind of a Yellow Jackets TV show cannibalism survival thing. It all culminated in 2024 for me, and I finally read a full account of the Donner Party, The Indifferent Stars Above. I have to say, I had never really read anything talking about the conquering of the West, so people in the 1800s going from the east coast of the US into the west coast of the US on wagons over several months, and not being really that great about it. Not only not great about it towards the people who were already there on these undiscovered lands, but also just not being very resourceful. What marked me the most about this story, and I guess spoiler for Donner Party, if you want to skip the next 30 seconds, is that some people managed to get away, managed to leave the little encampment and make it to civilization and get food, and then they'd be all right, come on, let's go rescue the others, and then they got stuck 4 more times. The rescue parties kept getting stuck in the snowy mountains and having to devour each other. It was cannibalism on cannibalism on cannibalism, stacked. One thing I found really fascinating, though, is that The factors that actually influenced who survived and who died were really interesting. Notably, marriage status and gender seemed to play a really big part in who survived the very hungry, very lean, and very cold winter. I found this book really harrowing. The writing was a little dry, I will say that, but I feel like I learned a lot. It was extremely well researched, and while I didn't enjoy it because this isn't a book you enjoy, it was good. It was really good. If you have any interest in this kind of thing, if you've read The Terror and want that again, this. And if you've read this and want that again, go read The Terror. They're both great. Um, I think I will actually just pop it. Yeah, let them just be friends on my tier ranking. They can just both hang out here on the B tier. They can be buddies. It was October by this point, and in October I do try to read more horror, but I'm already someone who reads a lot of horror, so what else is new? But I've also been working on reading some romance lately, and a few of my friends online, I love you guys very much, were reading Bloom by Delilah Dawson, which starts off as a picturesque cottagecore sapphic romance between a lovely independent farmer who makes her own soaps and makes these really good cupcakes, and she's so lovely, and her client, who is a struggling English professor slash poet. And they meet at the farmer's market and have this gorgeous little flirtation. They go on hikes together, and it's just like a really cute little cottagecore romance, very easy to read. And the cover looks like that. And then you keep reading, and I remember being at like 50%, and it's still cottagecore romance. And then I remember being at 70%, and it's still cottagecore romance. Everything's fine. And I remember being at 80%, and it's still cottagecore romance. And I'm like, and the sense of dread that filled me by that point, I'm like, what is gonna happen to warrant calling this horror? What is gonna happen? It took until the 85% mark. And until that point, I would have rated the book like a 2.5. Like, it's fine. It's fine. It's a little cottagecore la-di-da romance. And then it just punches you in the face repeatedly, hits you with the car, backs up, runs over you again and again and again. And the epilogue. This made Audition look tame. That's what I have to say about Bloom. It made Audition look tame. Like, what a beautiful... I don't want to talk more about it because I am trying to recommend this to you, and already knowing that there will be that tone switch, that the horror will come, I think that's kind of predicted by the cover. Like, I think you can kind of tell, so that doesn't feel like too much of a spoiler, but I don't want to tell you what the twist is. Because yes, there's a twist. Yes, there's a twist. Of course there's a twist. And it's somewhat predictable, but also somewhat not. And I couldn't get it off of this list because I read this in October. We're in January now, and I'm still thinking about this book every few days. And I don't get scared reading horror very often because I read a lot of horror. I was genuinely horrified at the ending. Especially that epilogue. Oh my god, that epilogue. Oh my god, that epilogue. I'm gonna put it in C just because it's very pulpy. Like, it's not great literature. It didn't change my life, but if you like horror, you should probably read this and just accept that the first 85% you're just gonna be like, why am I reading this? And then you'll be like, that's why I'm reading this. Since it was October, I had to pick up Shirley Jackson. I've been loving Shirley Jackson. This is the third of her novels that I've picked up. I've read a lot of her short stories, and this was so good. This is the story of Natalie. It's told over 3 sections, and Natalie is a 17-year-old girl who, she's a writer, she is beloved by her parents, and she is off to university. And before she leaves to university, something terrible happens, and she suppresses it deeply. And then at university, other terrible things, or strange things, or socially inappropriate things happen, and she still suppresses it deeply. And while it's a third-person narration, we're really watching over Natalie's shoulder, and we get to see her fall into a kind of madness that just, I think only Shirley Jackson could write. What an incredible book. That third part, there's a lot of tarot cards that come in for some reason, and that was pretty fun. Which is that third part is so unhinged from the like well-mannered American society that this book is actually anchored in. This is a book for teenage girls. If I had read this at 17, my copy would be battered because I would have reread it like 10 times. I mean, already I currently don't have a copy. I need a copy. I need a copy of this. And I like to believe that one is going to turn up at a used bookstore one day, and it will be tattered and annotated, and I'm going to give it a good home. That's what I want to believe, because this book is magic. This is the witchiest book I've ever read that wasn't actually about witches. It's a darker bell jar. It's a stranger bell jar. And it's fantastic. It's fantastic. Please read it. If you've enjoyed Shirley Jackson in the past, you know how good she is at what she does. This is really great. This is really great. She did a really good job. I'm gonna put it up here. I'm gonna put it, yeah. Yeah, I think I feel good about having it near women eating, actually. It's A tier. That feels good. A book I read in November that made it on here was an impulse purchase on Book Outlet maybe 2 years ago, and it had been sitting on my TBR for the longest time, and that's Shipwrecks. This is the story of a small Japanese island in feudal Japan. It's a small fisherman's island, and they pray for a shipwreck to come on their shores. Because what do? They pillage the shipwreck, and that is how they sustain themselves throughout the years. They pillage the rice, they pillage the spices, they pillage the salt, sometimes they even get sugar, and they wait for a shipwreck. But the sea giveth, and the sea taketh. And this was once again a story around starvation and survival and what that looks like. It paired incredibly with the terror and the indifferent stars above. It was a really great book, I have to say. The first half took me weeks to read, the second half took me a night. It's very much one of those books that it kind of has to build up. But whoa, the imagery. Those red robes will haunt me for quite a while. And then just the ending had this. Okay, I will spoil the ending because it's not that much of a spoiler. It's that our main character's father figure leaves to become an indentured servant. He leaves for a few years at the very beginning of the book because his family is starving. And at the very end of the book, he returns to see what happened to his family over the years he was gone. And so in the last page, you see him returning, and he has to face the horror of the things he couldn't protect them from. Oh, Plume. Here's Plume. Oh, hey, sweet girl. Oh, she just wants to cuddle. It's okay, Plume, we're almost done. We have one more book, and that's Little Eyes. I read this last month. This is an incredible book on like intimacy and parasocial relationships and voyeurism and surveillance. I loved it so much. I talked about it during my book haul video. I just found the series of short stories to be so excellently paced, though I'm still annoyed that the very first story, the story that opens the collection, isn't followed up on, because some of the stories that we read, we'll have like, this is Maria in San Jose or whatever, and then we meet Maria again a couple of stories later and get the next follow-up. The first chapter, there's no follow-up, and that made me sad because the first chapter was really provocative, but it also makes sense because you sort of know what the follow-up would be, for lack of a better word, and there were a lot of themes to explore. I should probably mention what Little Eyes is actually about. So it's about this new technology of little stuffed animals that can be remotely controlled by someone else, and in them they have a webcam. So if you buy one of these little stuffed animals, there's a person who can follow you around as a little bunny or a little dragon or whatever, and see your life in the webcam as long as you keep the little animal charged. And meanwhile, if you buy access to one, you end up being the pet of someone, possibly on the other side of the world. In the book, it's how some people see snow for the first time. We have a elderly mother living alone, whose son sends her this, and she becomes a voyeur into a young girl's apartment, a young woman's apartment, and like judges her romantic choices, which is pretty funny. The people that are paired together via the animal are randomly paired, and technically there's no way for them to directly interact within the system. But obviously, people kind of make up ways to find out who's watching me and who am I watching. Cat fur floating everywhere. And that has a lot of social repercussions because this is used by young and old, rich and poor, kids, not kids, people all over the world. It's really, really provocative novel, and especially in our age of doing things like this, where I don't know who you are, I don't know who you are watching me, and when I'm watching other YouTube content, people let me into their homes, and yeah, you get to see Plume, and you can tell me who you are, or you can just keep watching the video and say nothing, and I will never know. And that's kind of weird. So congratulations on being a little eye. I just realized I forgot I was tier ranking, and I just wanted to tell you about books. So Shipwrecks, I think I'm actually going to put it in the C tier, probably somewhere here. I'll just pop it in the end. I don't want to sort them too much. It was good, but like I said, the first half was eh. And then Little Eyes, it's definitely going to make it into A tier. I think I gave it 475 stars or something like that. It was just so... So here are my top 24 books of 2024. I really like that 4 of them ended up being at the highest tier, pure perfection. My favorite thing is Monsters, I Who Have Never Known Men, Monstrillo, and Knife. Lots of themes of survival, lots of themes of cannibalism for some reason, feminism, violence, lots of violence. It was a dark year, but it was also a really great reading year. I have to say, I'm delighted by this collection, and I can't wait what my favorite 25 books of 2025 will be, but I guess we'll have to wait about a year. Hope you enjoyed this. I had a lot of fun filming it, and it was lovely to have my little buddy Plume. Let me know if you've read any of these 24, and especially if you didn't like them, I want to know what you didn't like, because I do acknowledge all of these have flaws, and I'm curious if we saw the same flaws or not. And if you did love them, let's share the love. It's good for the engagement, but also I just like knowing what you like. I love talking to people about books, and these feel niche enough that I don't have a lot of people in real life who have read them. Unless I manage to throw a book at them. Alright, this was really fun. I've spent enough time looking at the camera and talking at the camera. I need to go cuddle with Plume, maybe have some dinner, maybe read a book. I have one due in 3 days. As always, I love you so much. I hope you're going to read a really great book soon, and bye for now.